So let's towards the end. I want to shift the gears a little about global science,
Yes,
and you have been working on thinking what was going on, sort of like other countries that participated on the outskirts of the Cold War in
right,
terms
right,
of space,
right.
and today as well. So, what do you find for places like India or in countries in Africa?
Yeah, it's nowadays we talk about sort of the globalization of space in countries like India and China and lots of other countries really. But it I've been investigating a little bit back in the Cold War that a lot of the tracking stations that the superpowers were tracking their astronauts and cosmonauts and were positioned in places like Africa and India. So that's one story that I'm following. Like, what happened to these tracking stations? Because they were really all over. And I'm finding the stories are really interesting because they came into conflict with lots of local people who didn't want these stations in their countries, etc. But the other thing I'm also interested in is other countries did try to start space programs in the 1960s, including India and countries like, uh, even Egypt and Pakistan and so forth. They, and I'm interested in the struggle to do that at the time that perhaps wasn't entirely successful because the creation of these sort of side space programs is an interesting story that hasn't really been told in terms of how, as new post-colonial countries were becoming independent, they also tried to sort of participate in this. One way to participate in it, and this is true many for many African countries, was to allow NASA to have stations in their countries. So Kenya or Nigeria or South Africa, and these kind of countries had lots of giant antennas, and these were big, high-tech infrastructures that were positioned. The governments had to make deals because NASA personnel had to be there, and so I'm interested in these stories because they created a kind of alternative history of space on the ground in places like Africa that you can really tell the whole story of the space race from ground stations in Africa. I think I counted like at least 15 to 20 countries that had enormous infrastructure, and we don't really know. A country like, I don't know, Somalia had infrastructure from the Soviet Union tracking spy satellites. So I think these stories have been lost. So I'm interested in that story.